spatial audio. So that's my reference point for it. But yeah,
that's gonna be most people's reference point.
Exactly. So
yeah, super interesting. I was thinking this as you were talking about kind of all your experience working in these pop vocal sessions. You have a lot of experience with recording vocals and making them sound great. And one of the main things I noticed in your mixes are just like luscious, spacious vocals. Yeah, tell me about your approach to when it comes to vocal tones and mixing.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing when you come up the way I come up, the first thing you learn is how to run Pro Tools super fast. And then as you kind of go through that journey of how can I run this session faster and faster and faster and faster, because you have to remember when you're doing these, especially songwriting sessions, how fast you are is a direct barrier to that person's creativity coming out. So if I can't run Pro Tools fast enough, they are going to lose an idea. So as you do that, you start building these templates. And I used to have, when I was doing a ton of sessions, I had a template that made sense for me. It's funny, these templates get passed around. People used to come in and be like, hey man, will you use my template? I'm like, no, I use my template. He's like, yeah, I like this template. I'm like, cool, I don't know that template. Okay, so if you want to do the session fast, we should use mine or we could use yours, and it's going to be confusing for everybody, but whatever. And so anyway, so I basically had a template that was kind of based around, how much level went into the audio track. And it's I know how that reverb's going to hit. I know how the delays are going to hit. I know how the compressors are going to hit. So as soon as somebody starts singing, there's enough EQ and enough compression on it that they are excited. And I know that I can hear through that and listen to how much analog compression I'm putting on it, And so that's the beginning of, focusing on vocals is kind of building these templates that I know are going to work. And so in my mix, moving on to my mix life here, it's all very template based, and it's also very level based. Like I mentioned with the tracking template, it's there's parallels. They're all set to get certain levels. A parallel compression on vocals. Everybody, I mean, how many people talk about parallel compression on vocals? Everybody. So they're okay. I do it too, and so it's not really answering your question, but for me, it's very systematic on, what I'm doing. And then, so there's a certain level of plugins that exist on every mix. And then, then there is a level of customization that goes song by song. So, I mean, I'm doing all the same stuff everybody else is doing, I think the thing that I've become the most hip to, and the thing that I think is most helpful to somebody that is less experienced, is that I would say 85% of the stuff I do in a mix now, I listen to the vocal. So if I am turning the bass up, I'm listening to the vocal. If I am EQing the guitars, I'm listening to the vocal, because it was a project that I did with my production partner, Corey. It's his solo record. We went down some rabbit holes that should have never been gone down, but I took a lot of tricks away from that. I mean, I do a lot of MS EQ, but only to make space for the vocal. I mean, if your vocal lives in the middle and your guitars are really fighting your vocal, even though they're hard panned, right? Let's just say it's rock guitars, hard left, right? There's still some stuff going on in the middle, right? So put a little mid EQ on there, clean a little bit space up on different instruments, drums sometimes, as long as you're not affecting the punch, because obviously you really want a nice center kick and snare. But you can get away with doing some things to the middle that will let the vocal have more space, And then I find that by the time I'm done, with a mix, the vocal's crazy loud because I've made all this space for it. So then I have to go for a walk and then come back and figure out how loud the vocal's supposed to be. But that's
interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that I think I've taken away in the last 2 to 3 years that I think is the most helpful for somebody, is to think about everything you're doing as affecting the vocal, and you'll find that you do less stuff to the vocal by doing that.
That's awesome. Yeah, over EQing a vocal is certainly an issue I've had. The other thing I noticed about your vocal tone is just the ambience and the space and the reverbs. Do you have any go-to reverbs that you love, or is that all templated as well? What do your reverbs look like?
So I've got, Valhalla. There's
The vintage Verb.
vintage Verb default. I mean, come on, it's amazing.
What a haul! The 4-second haul.
So
it.
I have
Yeah.
I have that, and then I have a couple other presets that I've saved. So vintage Verb is probably a go-to. I like the UAD Pure Plate. I like that really short, like almost slappy, like almost like a room. I use that a lot. The other thing I'm really into is Echo Boy as like a room, not as like a discernible delay. So like a very filtered, little bit of feedback, add some diffusion. Like if you drop down that panel, like, where you can go deeper and get nerdy, you can get some cool stuff if you mess with the stuff that looks confusing. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're mixing records, you know the panel I'm talking about. But if you don't own Echo Boy, then you don't know what I'm talking about. So, but yeah, I like a lot of short delays. I think bring some depth and space. And then the only analog, if you want to call it an analog piece of gear that I still use is an SPX 90. SPX 90 turned my head, so you can't. I looked at it. I love it so much.
I can't even see it in the frame.
Right. It's not real. And so there's like a doubler preset on there that you can just push way harder than like a waves doubler or a micro shift. And it's got a vibe, because it's kind of an old piece of shit. But so that's kind of not a secret, but that's on a lot of my vocals. Because it doesn't sound as doubly as a lot of other things do.
Yeah, I like to sneak in a little bit of doubling sometimes to make a vocal sound a bit thicker. I'll often use like the Waves, what's the ADT, the real ADT.
Yes, I like that one. Yeah,
and that one has a vibe to it,
mm-hmm.
and I find it's just like getting a little bit of that underneath, tucked under the vocal, can really add a bit of, I don't know, girth.
Yeah,
for lack
that
of a
one.
Better word.
I love using that one. Like if somebody does like just a single double instead of like a left right. That ADT for me is like the best way to turn that single into a left right, or one of my go-tos. I mean, you can revoice it too if you're a revoice user. But yeah, other doublers I like the Eventide stuff a lot. I use
people swear by the Eventide stuff.
I have 2 presets in my session, one for BVs. I can't even tell you which ones they are, but I mean, they're the Eventide harmonizers and doublers. They're all great. So
amazing. Well, just in general, I think your mixes sound awesome. So, do you have any other approaches to mixing? I'm assuming it's templated, philosophies, things you're thinking about, tried and true techniques, aside from vocals.
What's nerdy that people are into? Something that I really love is the Plugin Alliance plugins. I mean, I'm a huge UAD fan. Like I've bought enough UAD plugins to probably trade them in for a car, but, the Plugin Alliance stuff with their TMT or whatever it is, True Model Technology or something like that, with those little variances. So like in my template, basically, once you're done prepping it, almost every track or every summing bus has an SSL on it. And all of those SSLs are set to different, quote, channels, right? So you've got 72 little variations. And I find that gives you this depth that you didn't have when it was all the same setting. It's those little phase variances and little like frequency variances that give you more of that analog feel. So that really won me over to the Plugin Alliance stuff. And then, I think that they're making really great plugins, but the SSL is what sucked me into their stuff. So I think that's worth exploring. Like I said, I think that, the main thing that I approach every mix with is that the vocal is king or queen and that like nothing can touch the vocal. And I have definitely gone too far making space for the vocal, but, that's just like, I EQ everything, not in solo. I mean, a lot of people do that. It's not like a new technique, but it's when I started doing that is I feel like when my mixes actually got good. Like if you're doing a lot of stuff in solo,
you're going to over EQ, over compress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, when you have better monitoring, you tend to do less, which is something that my acoustician told me. And I realized when I got new speakers, I was like, oh, I'm doing less because I'm not hearing weird shit through my monitors.
Yeah.
I could really hear what's actually happening. And it's like, oh, this vocal kind of sounds good the way it is. I don't actually need to do a bunch of notches.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. A bunch of guys on the show have talked about kind of like mixing into limiters to get like optimal loudness. Is this something that you're into, or are you kind of more of a let's keep the dynamics kind of a guy?
It's funny. I was just listening to your show at the gym this morning, your last episode, and you guys were talking about this, and I was like, I feel like we're going to talk about this. I need to think about this.
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking about. After talking to Andrew Murray, who's such a killer mixer. And he's into this kind of like mixing into the limiter, getting that optimal loudness to get the best punchiness out of the kick and the bass. And
yeah,
I mean, I don't think I could mix like that kind of, but it's super fascinating.
I mean, I can tell you my process, and then we can decide whether I'm doing good or bad.
Yeah,
but
sure.
So back to my Disney Pop days, we were pushing mixes pretty hard into an Apogee soft limit, one of the AD16X's soft limit on. And so we were sending back then limited mixes to mastering. And coming from Capitol, thought that was like just the grossest, meanest thing you could do. But we were doing it, right? I on my own, I never did that. And so my process was always, whether my mix bus was analog or all digital, to get a nice healthy level. Like, that's really the secret to, like a high level LUFS mix, is that the mix itself is loud.
Right.
I mean, I think
totally.
Before I put a limiter on, usually the times that I have checked to see how loud my mixes are, I mean, it's around -14, by itself, without limiting. So we're already at the Spotify penalty number, right?
Totally.
And maybe that's a hot mix. Maybe there's other people listening to this that are like, just -14, what a loser. But that's where my mixes are. They're around -14. And so then you put the limiter on, right? And yeah, it changes. It gets way louder. And then what do? I do all the mix revisions listening through the limiter. Like, I do like 90% of my work, no limiter. But mix bus on. Like, mix bus basically from the beginning. Like, SSL bus compressor on. There's a multi-band that I use that I pop on like midway, but most of my bus processing is on for most of the mix. And so I mix into that stuff. That stuff can never go away, or people will just be like throwing hard drives at me. But the limiter, I would slap that on at the end. I'd make it loud. I was never great at making it loud. And so then you would do all your mix revisions listening to the limiter, and then I would take the limiter off. I'd print the mix, I'd send it to mastering. And I started, like, in the last year, having mastering engineers being like, hey, will you send me the limited version? I'm like, why? Like, you're good at making it loud. I'm not. Like, you don't, like, why do you want my limited version? It's because that's what everybody listened to, right? So then when I started thinking about it, I've decided that I now send unlimited and limited to mastering. And I take time. Like, I used to just open a Pro L2, shove it up like 5 or 6 dB until it was like -8, -9, not touch a single thing, and print it, right? Mm-hmm. Now I'm going between the Pro L2 settings. Like, I try modern, I try dynamic, I try transparent.
Punchy,
I try oversample. Like, I always process it oversample. I mess with I actually try to get it loud and kind of make it feel like the mix, and then I work through that. And so my new philosophy, it's newer in the last 6 months, is that I want to try to make a really great sounding loud mix and give the mastering engineer that as an option, because before, for years, it was an afterthought for me. So yeah, I guess the answer to your question is 50-50. How about that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say no, because I feel like you're not mixing into the limiter.
But I'm doing the recalls into the limiter.
You're doing the recalls into the limiter.
And now that I'm committing to the limiter, I am putting it on earlier, but it's still like, 60% of the mix is without it instead of 90. But I do think it's important because everybody has the same tools, and I think it was your show that I heard that on, and I thought about it.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe it was your episode with Andrew. I'm not sure, but somebody said...
It could be. We all have the same tools. It's
right,
true.
Exactly. Everybody has the same tools now, and especially like you talk to some amazing mastering engineers that are like in the box with like Ozone. And you're like, I have Ozone, so like, why don't I just spend some more time making it sound loud? Because that's what you're going to do. And so that's kind of my new philosophy, is like, mastering is there to, to take it the extra set of ears, but I don't really necessarily want mastering to be the one to make it loud anymore. But,
Interesting.
That's new for me. I don't know. Find one of my clients.
Say, as a podcast host,